All right, hello everybody. I'm going to be talking about automating accessibility checks on websites, specifically Python websites or web apps with a Python backend, since we are at a Python conference. And I did learn in an email from my library, because I do read emails from my library, that August is Disability Pride Awareness Month, apparently. So this is a good timing for this talk. So background on me, I'm currently at Microsoft, where I'm a Python cloud advocate, which means helping Python developers put stuff on Azure. Before that, I did a brief stint at UC Berkeley until I realized academia was horrible. I was one of the first engineers at Coursera, back when it was written in Python. It got ported to Scala, so I quit. I was at Khan Academy. I was both an engineer and the creator of the Khan Academy programming courses. And I was also at Google for a long time, and that's where I met Guido, who's, invented Python. So, so that's my general background. Specifically in terms of accessibility, why am I talking about accessibility? I've had a lot of interaction with it over the course of my career. So at Coursera, I was actually handed a very long document, which was our first accessibility audit, and I had to fix everything. And I remember some of those stuff were quite fiddly. We were written in Backbone at the time. Backbone.js, and so I remember having to fix, the banners and stuff like that. Then at Khan Academy, I also helped with accessibility audits, but then I also was creating content in Khan Academy, and one day I got an email from a blind user who wasn't able to use a bunch of the questions that I'd written for APCSP, and they were really, really frustrated, and they gave me a list of everything wrong. So I just spent a week fixing every single thing to not, to use everything that's accessible and not use any of the inaccessible things. So I got rid of the drag and drop, because drag and drop is really, really hard to make accessible. And just, so I ended up simplifying stuff and then I realized that the majority of our widgets for Khan Academy weren't even accessible, and that started a whole thing. So a lot of experience with accessibility there, because of course Khan Academy is education focused, and there you definitely want to make sure everything is accessible. At Microsoft, I'm trying to make sure that every sample we put out there is accessible, but that it has accessible checks, so that anybody who builds on the sample, I want them to accidentally make all of their stuff accessible too. So if I can work checks into our samples, then we can have everything forked off of that would be accessible as well. So that's my goal, and that's what we're going to do today. So just briefly talking about accessibility. What is it? Many ways you could define it, but generally it's making your website usable by as many people as possible, especially those with disabilities. Disabilities can be permanent, they can be temporary, they can also be situational. So I love thinking about it this way, because I think a lot of times we only think about permanent, but when you think about temporary and situational, you probably realize that you have been in many of those situations yourself. Right now, I have a 14-month-old baby. So I actually do much of my programming with only one arm. So if you wonder why my commit messages aren't that great anymore, I'm sorry. I used to take great pride in my commit messages, and now they're just crap, because I'm just like, right? Because it's, I only have one arm, the rest is taken by the baby who's napping on me forever. And this is another matrix just to get across the point that disabilities affect all senses and ways of interacting with something. And I like thinking of it this way, because I think probably you can look at this and think of a time when you were in one of these situations. So accessibility is important. Hopefully everybody here thinks that's true, but morally, it's also the law in America, especially if you're making a government website or a university website. It does have to adhere to certain accessibility guidelines. And if you're a corporation, it is known to be good for business, because you're making your website usable by more people, right? More users. But a lot of us do not measure accessibility. Does anybody here have automated accessibility checks of websites that you develop? Oh, okay, cool. We have a one-hand wavy. All right. So most of us don't, because it's hard, and this is something kind of new. But we know that generally what we measure matters, right? If our CI doesn't have a check that turns red, we don't care. We're busy. I've been a web developer. There's so many things that we have to worry about. We have to worry about performance, security. Does it actually work, right? So I'm trying to make it easier to measure, because then I think we can pay attention to it. So let's talk about how we measure accessibility. So you could start off with measuring it manually, right? So 2 extensions that I use, one of them Accessibility Insights, that's from Microsoft, and then one of them is Axe Core. So let's go ahead and start the audit of North Bay Python. So if we click on Accessibility Insights, I'll start with the FastPass. And if we look at the FastPass, we can see 31 failed instances across 3 violations. So the bunch of them is this link name. So we can look here, but we can also close this and then look back on the page and see all these red highlights here. These are all indications of violations. And the issue here is that I'm pretty sure this is like a Twitter icon or a Mastodon icon or something. Hopefully it's not an X, but all it is, if you look at the HTML, it's only an I tag for a bootstrap icon, and that is not accessible. So if they wanted to make it accessible, they could add some hidden text, they could add an ARIA label. There's many things they could do to make that accessible. So yeah, so that's one extension. We could also look at the Axe Core extension, which is on here. Let me get this smaller so we can see it. Okay, Axe DevTools, and we're going to say, wait, first let me reload the page, and then I'm going to tell it to scan all of my page. And here you can see this time it actually finds even more issues, 37 issues. 26 of those are the link problem. But this also points out a few more issues around landmarks, which is something like the main tag or the footer tag. Okay, so there are a couple issues. There you go. There's your audit. Now you can fix that for next time. But we're going to keep on trying to automate this, right? Because the thing is, most people do not remember to use these tools. We had a tool like this at Khan Academy called Totally, and it was even open source, and lots of people used it. And I just remember most of the time, we would just turn it off. Because most of the time, we're just trying to get something to work. We're working on some other issue. I was a content creator, and I'm like, this thing is getting in my way all the time. So most times, we just didn't use it, or people just didn't even know about it, right? So it's a nice tool for a quick check, but it's not going to ensure accessibility forever, right? What you also can do is an external audit. That's what we had done at Coursera and Khan Academy occasionally. Usually you're only going to have this like once a year or even less if you've ever had an audit. It's very thorough. There are experts doing it. They'll give us a really long document. So I do recommend getting an audit if you can, because it's super helpful. But it's a big process, and it's easy for regressions to happen after that audit. So automation, we do have automated tools. The big one is Axe Core. It is written in JavaScript, which makes sense because it's actually checking a rendered web page, and JavaScript is the language of the browser. And basically, every other tool builds on top of Axe Core. So you're going to hear me talk about Axe Core a lot, because that's what everything builds on. So there's a wrapper, Pali, I don't know how to pronounce it, but a lot of times accessibility is shortened to A11Y because it's such a long word and nobody wants to write it. But then I never know how to say 11D. I don't know. So there are some tools that build on top of Axe Core. So let's talk about Axe Core, because that's what everything builds on, and that's what we're going to build on for Python. So Axe Core must be used on a rendered web page, not just on static HTML, because what matters is how it gets rendered. So you can actually even run Axe Core like at different resolutions, because some things might happen at a mobile resolution and not at a big resolution, right? Because it cares about, is something on top of something else? What is the color contrast of the background to the foreground? All of this stuff is much easier to discern when it's actually running on a rendered web page. So like this example here, I have a basic HTML page. It's got an image tag. The source is Pamela baby donkey. I don't have an alt there, so who knows what that's a photo of. Is it Pamela riding a baby donkey? I don't know. We're going to find out. But then I can load in Axe Core, and then I can tell Axe to run, and then I can log out the violations. So let's try that. And there we go. It's Pamela and her baby dressed up as donkeys from Encanto. But let's take a look at the violations, okay? So these got logged out from Axe Core, from the JavaScript. This is a JavaScript array. with objects in it. And so what you can see is, this is an array of all the violations. And so this is what Axe Core gives you, is a big old array of all the things it's checked on this page and the issues it's found with it. And it's really helpful what it gives you. It tells you, the nodes it found for any particular rule. And so you can say, it says here, this is what the HTML of the node is, and this is how you can fix it. So there's a lot of really great stuff it gives you. And here you can take another look at it here. And there's documentation as well that tell you all about this violations object. So this is what we're going to be working with, because this tells us what are the issues, what do we need to fix. So how do we use it from Python? Because this is JavaScript, right? So this is all of this example here is all JavaScript here. Let me make that real big and clear, right? So loading in that JavaScript, running that JavaScript. How are we going to use that from Python? Well, one way of doing this is to use a tool that can render a web page and then inject the JavaScript into that page, run it, and get the result. So that's what we're going to do. The two big tools for this are Selenium and Playwright. Has anyone used Selenium here? Okay, yeah. So, and Selenium's been around for a long time. Has anybody had flaky tests in Selenium? Debug that. Yeah. I've been doing Selenium tests for so long. So Selenium is great. It supports many, many, many browsers, like almost all browsers. But it can be, Selenium tests can be flaky sometimes. Generally, all end-to-end tests can be flaky sometimes. But Selenium is very often used for end-to-end testing. Another option, Playwright, this came out somewhat recently from Microsoft, and generally it's considered to be a little more reliable because it's working on a slightly lower level, but it is still using the browser engine. So you can have it spin up a Chromium browser, you can have it spin up a Firefox browser, but not getting as specific as Selenium. So those are two options. You can totally do everything I'm showing in Selenium if that's your preference, but I decided to use Playwright. So let's see how we can use them. Playwright is available for lots of languages, but it is available for Python, so that's what we're going to use. So we have the Playwright package. We install that. After you install the package, you do also have to install the browsers. So they don't get installed together. Installing the browsers is like a lot. This is going to be the longest, the longest part of this process is installing those browsers, especially you actually really have to do it with dependencies, and it brings in all these things that the browsers use, all these C libraries I don't understand. So just always do that whole thing, install with deps. It's going to bring in the browsers. You could only install Chromium or only install Firefox if you want to restrict to just one of those browsers, up to you. But that is the thing that's going to take the longest of this process. But we always do it separately because it's just a big to-do. So with Playwright, in order to render a web page, we can either use sync Playwright or async Playwright. So using sync, start at this context, we tell Chromium to launch, we go to a new page in the Chromium browser, we tell it to go to northbaypython.org, and then at that point, we can inspect anything about the page, right? We can look into it, we've got it all rendered, and then we can close the browser. So let me just do that just to show you that that works. So Python example, let's see. I probably shouldn't even do demos because we don't even have that much time today, but it's just always good to prove that something works, and then I'll stop trying to prove anything. So this will do, and you won't actually see it open because I've told it to open headless. If you did want to really see what was going on, you can open with a head full. I don't know what you call it, but you could actually open. But there you see, it got the title and it closed the browser, right? So behind the scenes, and sometimes you can catch it if it's being slow. You'll see this like little Chromium pop up on your dock, and then it does its thing and it closes. All right, so then we need to inject Axe into it. So we can add the script tag using Playwright, and then we can use this evaluate method from Playwright to run axe.run. And then that is going to get the results of axe.run and give it to our Python. So this is how we get the interaction with the JavaScript library and are able to use the results in Python. Now, to make this easier, I made a Python package because that's like what we do around here. So I made Axe Playwright Python, and it basically does what I showed you, is that it runs the library on a Playwright page. It also gives you a bit more functionality. but hopefully it makes it a little bit easier to do. So we've got this axe class, and I say axe.run on the playwright page, and then I can print out the results of that accessibility check, and that will be, a Python dictionary. And we can also print out reports that are more human readable than that dictionary, and this will come in handy when we want to do like tests and have generated reports and stuff like this. So this generated report is nice, better formatted than just looking at a dict. And then we also have this snapshot, which we're going to see how that's useful very soon. So that's a package that makes it easy if you do want to bring in Axe Core to Python. Now, how do we test with pytest? This is where it starts to get interesting, right? So now we know we can get out the violations and we can look at them, but what does it mean to actually write a test that uses them? So first, pytest, popular testing framework. Who's used pytest here? Yeah, all right. So very popular. I only discovered it a year ago, but now I just use it all the time. Playwright does have a pytest plugin that gives you a page fixture. So behind the scenes, it does the whole open browser thing. So, if we wanted to use the pytest playwright plugin in order just to open a page, we can say, use the page fixture, page.goto. We can click that button that says tickets on sale. And then we can use expect, which is another fixture that checks to make sure that, that something exists. And the reason it has expect is that expect will actually wait, which is different from assert. Assert is going to check the current state, but expect does actually wait for something to exist to become true. So it's slightly different than just using a straight assert. So that's why Playwright does have its own fixture for asserting. Okay, when we bring in Axe, what we could do is import my Axe class from the package I wrote, and then we go to the page, and then we tell Axe to run on the page. We get back the results. And then we could assert that the violations count is 0, right? There are no violations in this page. Amazing. It's accessible. And then if there were violations, we could give an assertion message, which is that report, right? So if we do that, then we get a message like this. So we'll see, found 5 accessibility violations, and then the report would give us all the details about this. So that's cool. That actually, I was able to use this for my personal website in order to get it to 0 violations. But most of us are working on websites where it's really hard to get to 0 violations, right? Maybe because you don't have, you have limited resources. Maybe because you're using third-party libraries that are not accessible. So I did actually run this on my slides themselves because my slides are HTML. And there are a bunch of accessibility issues, but they're all with this hamburger plugin thing, and I can't control it, right? So it's really hard to get to 0 violations. If you can do it, amazing, awesome. You can just use this, and this will work for you. But I thought we needed a solution where it would work for our existing web pages to make sure we didn't introduce regressions in the amount of accessibility violations we have, right? So what we can do is snapshot testing. And this is an idea I got from watching this UMich talk from folks who work at University of Michigan, the IT department there, and they're using snapshot testing to do their accessibility tests. And I've got a link to the talk in here. So really great, and I think it's an awesome idea. So what is a snapshot test? It's generally a way to test that the output of a function matches a previously saved snapshot. So you actually save the snapshots in your source control. And that's actually pretty cool for something that you want to track over time, because you can see how those snapshots change with different things introduced. So there's a couple Python pytest snapshot plugins. One is pytest Snapshot. The other one is pytest Insta. They're pretty similar. I built on pytest Snapshot. So basically, we tell Snapshot, we use this fixture, snapshot.assert match, and the first time you run it, it will, the first time you run it, you have to tell it to make the snapshots. So it's actually going to generate the snapshots in your file system. And then the next time you run it, it's going to see if the new snapshot matches the old snapshot. And if not, you've got, discrepancies there that you need to work out. So in terms of accessibility testing, what we can do is say, because actually sometimes we want the snapshots to change, right? Like we want to have less violations. So it is a good thing if the snapshot says, the new one says, oh, there's actually, less of it before. What we don't want is more violations. So what I did was I once again made another package, but I wanted, because I really wanted a nice error message that said whether it was a good assertion error or a bad assertion error, because I'm very sensitive, and I want my assertion errors to, to congratulate me if it was actually a good thing. So if it was less violations, it should be like, congratulations, the new snapshot has less violations, you should update that snapshot. If it's more violations, it just says, like, you're bad. And you should just fix that, right? You shouldn't, ideally, you should not be introducing new violations into existing code base. Or you should, beg for mercy on your PR. So once again, another package with pytest axe playwright snapshot. I know, very snappy name there. And it does snapshot testing. So we have this axe pytest snapshot fixture, and we just pass in the page, and it will take the snapshot and use that pytest snapshot library. So on the first run, we're going to tell it explicitly to update the snapshots, and we can do that with an arg. And that will save a snapshot. So in this case, you can see saving snapshot.txt. And in this snapshot, we see the violation rules and how many instances happened. And you could put more stuff in your snapshots, but this, I thought, was a nice, succinct thing to track. And then in the subsequent runs, you just run pytest like normal, and it would compare, generate the new snapshot and compare it to the old one. So what does it look like? Well, if you introduce a new bug, you're going to say, it says new violations found. That's bad news. Fix it. Or if you really want to, you could update the snapshots. And then it gives you all the additional information. If you fix something, it says that's good news. And then you could update the snapshots. So that's what it looks like. I tried to, I don't know, put emojis in there to make it nicer. But and also, these are packages that I welcome pull requests on, especially if you manage to use this in your code base to see what actually works for people. Like, what do you want to see in your pytest output? This is also the first time I've made a pytest plugin, so it's interesting to see how to make a pytest plugin. But yeah, so with this, we can do CI/CD integration, so we could run these tests on every PR. So here's an example. We're running all the tests, and I'm just running the tests like I normally do. But this time, here's a PR where I added an image that didn't have an alt attribute. So then I go through and look at this, and it says, uh-oh, bad news, you introduced a regression. And it's all red. Look at all that red. I need to fix that red because I'm compulsive red fixer. Okay, so yeah, all right, so we've got CI, we've got 1 minute left. All right, so tips for your accessibility tests and also for all tests. So this is relevant probably to anyone who's doing testing of your Python apps. Keep your database state constant, all right? Any little change in your database can throw something off, right? Whether you're doing a little fixture, whatever you're doing to make sure you have exactly the same database state across tests. Wait for the page to be ready. If you're doing any sort of asynchronous data loading, if you're using HTMX, right, you need to wait for that to be ready. So actually in my test, I check to make sure that it no longer says loading. If I don't check for that, I get super flaky tests, because it's so fast, right? Sometimes it checks before it loads, and sometimes it checks after. So keep in mind if any of your page is being loaded asynchronously. Related to that, test more than the initial load. If there's any user interaction on your page, if your user is typing and something happens, you can do an additional test for that. So here, I check the test, I check my page when it first loads, and then I have another test that actually fills in the form, clicks the button, and then I can run accessibility on that state as well. You can run it at any state in the game. You can even check the loading state. So, be very explicit and think about how your page changes over time. And I actually did find multiple bugs just writing these tests. That's a great thing about tests, when you write the test and you find bugs. So once you find these issues, how do you fix it? At that point, I would recommend using those browser extensions, because they are more user-friendly than my error messages, as much pride as I put in them. I would just use the browser extension at that point, and that's why I do like using the Axe DevTools extension, because they will match perfectly, because it's Axe Core. And also, do not rely on automation to find all issues. So this is really important. It's only going to find about 57% of WCAG issues. So you still need to be doing manual testing. You still need to be doing external audits, engaging with users who have disabilities, hiring employees who have disabilities. All of that, don't rely on automation, but at least start with it or have some of it. And that is all I have. So thank you, everyone. And here's lots of links. Grab the slides. Talk to me after. Would love to make this useful for more people.
Thanks, Pamela. I carefully tread around the cat here.